This is being called Prime Minister Modi's most substantial visit.
Many advances in AI, even more momentous development in another AI, America and India.
The vibe and symbolism are hard to miss, but this visit promises to deliver more than optics.
India and the United States work and lead together, and we are.
What did it achieve? What does it mean for the India-US relationship and the changing world order? Catch all the updates and analysis with me, Palki Sharma, only on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Vantage USA. It's Friday morning here in Washington, D.C. It's still raining. It's day 3 of Prime Minister Modi's state visit and we're looking ahead at another packed day. Lots of business engagements, plus a meeting with the Indian diaspora. We'll track all of it. Also tell you about yesterday. It was a big day. First, there was a ceremonial welcome. We were inside the White House and we can tell you it was truly a grand event, complete with Bollywood songs. Then there was a crucial bilateral at the Oval Office. We were there too. Lots of deals have been done and we'll discuss them in a bit. The Prime Minister addressed the US Congress. Before attending a big state dinner, we had a ringside view of all of it and we'll share our impressions with you, also the big takeaways and the analysis on this show. First, as always, the headlines. The Pentagon says the counter-offensive can be tough for Ukraine and there could be casualties on both sides. Meanwhile, Kiev has called for patience and claims, quote-unquote, partial success in holding back Russia in the south. Lebanon's economic crisis is worsening. The government has put a limit on how much money people can withdraw from banks. Angry citizens are protesting in front of the country's central bank. Beijing records its hottest June day in 60 years. Temperatures touch 41 degrees Celsius in some parts. The city is currently dealing with a prolonged heat wave. India will introduce new power tariffs from 2024. They'll allow you to save money in the morning, but you'll be charged a premium during the night. This is part of Delhi's efforts to boost the use of renewable energy. And Meta is removing news from Facebook and Instagram in Canada. This move comes after Canada's Senate passed the Online News Act. This act will force tech companies to pay news publishers for their content. There is a lot of excitement in the air. We are in the south lawns of the White House. I'm sure you can hear the people chanting and a lot of people have gathered here. People from the Indian community who've come from across the United States of America to greet Prime Minister Modi.
Even more momentous development in another AI, America and India.
Please join me in a toast. Here it comes. The good news for both of us, neither of us drink.
मैंने देखा है कि आपकी मेहमान नवाजी से प्रभावित होकर कई बार आपके मेहमान गाना भी गाने लगते हैं। काश मुझ में भी गाने की कला होती तो मैं भी आपको कुछ सुनाता।
You've seen the pictures, the pomp and the ceremony. Thursday packed in a lot. Like I said, it was a big day for the Indian Prime Minister. He has visited the United States multiple times, but this was his first state visit. So everything was more grand. The Americans have rolled out the red carpet before, but this one you could say was bigger and better. We were inside the White House and we can say that it was a welcome like no other. There were marching troops on the South Lawn, thousands of Indian Americans waiting, bilateral talks in the Oval Office, and then a grand state dinner customized to accommodate the Prime Minister's vegetarian diet. The two leaders hugged. They walked together. They addressed a press conference together and seemed to be sharing jokes at the state dinner. The optics could not have been better. They're talking about a new era in the US-India partnership.
भारत और अमेरिका के संबंधों के इतिहास में एक विशेष महत्व रखता है। आज की हमारी चर्चा और हमारे द्वारा लिए गए महत्वपूर्ण निर्णयों से हमारी कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव ग्लोबल स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप में एक नया अध्याय जुड़ा है।
A lot of deals and agreements have been signed. Many meetings are lined up today. It's a jam-packed schedule. Prime Minister Modi is meeting CEOs. There's a lunch with Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and finally a meeting with the Indian diaspora. So it won't be an exaggeration to call it one of the most substantive visits. But do remember, this is an election year, both in India and the US. And the stakes are high for both the leaders. And the politics was very much at play. So an interview and a press conference seem to be taking up more mind space and feeding the social media chatter than all the work done. And that's the nature of this beast for you, the beast called politics. So let's tell you about these two as well. First, the press conference. It was a rare one for the Indian Prime Minister. He's long been criticized for not facing the press and not taking questions. On Thursday, he did. He met the press in the East Room of the White House. We were there. And they were running behind schedule, so both leaders decided to take only two questions, one from the American press and one from the Indian press. Now remember what this visit is about. Defense partnership, semiconductors, the China challenge, trade, space collaboration, a host of other things. But the Indian Prime Minister was asked about this, religious freedom in India.
India has long prided itself as the world's largest democracy, but there are many human rights groups who say that your government has discriminated against religious minorities and sought to silence its critics.
लोग कहते हैं नहीं भारत डेमोक्रेसी है और जैसा राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन ने कहा भारत और अमेरिका दोनों के डीएनए में लोकतंत्र है। लोकतंत्र हमारा स्पिरिट है, लोकतंत्र हमारे रगों में है, लोकतंत्र को हम जीते और हमारे पूर्वजों ने उसको शब्दों में ढाला है संविधान के रूप में और हमारी सरकार लोकतंत्र के मूलभूत मूल्यों को आधार लेकर के बने हुए संविधान के आधार पर चलती है। इसलिए भारत के लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों में कोई भेदभाव नहीं है, न धर्म के आधार पर, जाति के आधार पर, न उम्र के आधार पर, न भूभाग के आधार पर।
Prime Minister Modi says democracy is in our DNA. The question was asked by the Wall Street Journal's Sabrina Siddiqui, an Indian origin American reporter. Ahead of the visit, she even wrote an opinion piece. And let me quote from the first line of that piece. President Biden will host a complicated guest, Narendra Modi, whose country is a vital bulwark against China, but whose government has a checkered record on human rights. That's her opinion piece. Now, that's her opinion, and of course, she's entitled to it, like all journalists and all individuals are. My point is, her views were known, and yet she's the one who got to ask the question. And this is what democracy is about. You disagree, you debate, yet you engage. And exchanges like these only strengthen that. So we say the world can do with more press conferences. Now, even before this one began, the clips of an interview began doing the rounds. It featured a former US President, Barack Obama. He spoke to CNN and he was asked about India. Let me quote from what he said. If I had a conversation with Prime Minister Modi, who I know well, part of my argument would be that if you do not protect the rights of ethnic minorities in India, there is a strong possibility at some point that India starts pulling apart. So Obama believes that India risks pulling apart. Let me rephrase that for you. Here's a former US president speaking in the language of Pakistanis and Khalistanis and being cheered by some political players in India. He's predicting India's breakup. Now, to comment on or criticize a country is one thing. To speak of its breakup is quite another. In this case, it seems both motivated and dangerously exaggerated. And look at the timing. I'm sure it was sheer coincidence that this interview came out just as Prime Minister Modi and President Biden sat down for the bilateral. Obama knows that Prime Minister Modi is in America for a state visit. He knows what his former vice president is saying about India. What do you think he was trying to do here? Embarrass Modi and by extension his host Joe Biden? Or playing the bad cop while Biden plays the good host? Honestly, it's hard to say, although this is not the first time that Barack Obama has talked about India's religious freedom. In 2015, during his visit to India, he brought up the subject and now he's predicting India's division. It's a dangerous game of narrative war and it has become a slugfest on social media now. The other side is digging up details on how many bombs Obama dropped on Muslim countries and how many Muslims were killed by Americans on his watch. And it only goes downhill from here. I expect this to continue for a while. It shows that for all the progress the India-US relationship has made, there is still more work to be done. And that along with the jet engines and the semiconductors, the odd sermons will be thrown in. It's up to Modi and Biden to cancel the noise and keep the work going. Another big highlight of the day was Prime Minister Modi's address to the US Congress. It's what they call the American Parliament, situated in the iconic Capitol building. The Indian leader addressed a joint session of the US Congress, the only Indian leader to do so twice. The first time he did it was in 2016. Yesterday was the second time. Only a handful of world leaders have done this, the likes of Winston Churchill and Benjamin Netanyahu. So what was different from his 2016 speech? For starters, the length. The first one was about 45 minutes, this one around an hour. And what did the Prime Minister talk about? Well, everything from trade to technology and defense to democracy. This is what he said about India-US relations.
In the past few years, there have been many advances in AI, artificial intelligence. At the same time, there have been even more momentous development in another AI, America and India.
It's already trending. AI, America and India, he said. He also spoke about the growing defense ties.
At the turn of century, now the United States has become one of our most important defense partners. I would say the scope of our cooperation is endless. The potential of our synergies is limitless. And the chemistry in our relations is effortless.
But cooperation is impossible without people, and in this case, the Indian Americans. So the Indian leader spoke about the Samosa Caucus. It's what they call a group of Indian Americans in the US Congress.
There are millions here who have roots in India. Some of them sit proudly in this chamber. And there is one behind me who has made history. I'm told that the Samosa Caucus is now the flavor of the house. I hope it grows and brings the full diversity of Indian cuisine here.
So friendship is great, but India and US share a common challenge too, and that is China. And Prime Minister Modi spoke about China in perhaps the strongest possible terms yet. As always, he did not name the country, but what he said stands out.
A region where all nations, small and large, are free and fearless in their choices, where progress is not suffocated by an impossible burdens of debt. Where connectivity is not leveraged for strategic purposes, where all nations are lifted by the high tide of shared prosperity.
The other issue he tackled was the Ukraine war. The Prime Minister reiterated that this was the era of peace.
With the Ukraine conflict, war has returned to Europe. It is causing great pain in the region. Since it involves major powers, the outcomes are severe. Countries of the global south have been particularly affected. The global order is based on the respect for the principle of the UN Charter, peaceful resolution of disputes, and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity.
He spoke about how the war affects the global south. And that's a region whose cause India has championed. The Prime Minister is pushing to include the African Union in the G20.
As we emerge out of the pandemic, we must give shape to a new world order. Consideration, care, and concern are the need of the hour. Giving a voice to the global south is the way forward. That is why I firmly believe that the African Union be given full membership of G20.
Throughout his speech, there was one common thread: the focus on India's democratic credentials.
Democracy is the spirit that supports equality and dignity. Democracy is the idea that welcomes debate and discourse. Democracy is the culture that gives wings to thought and expression. India is blessed to have such values from times immemorial. In the evolution of the democratic spirit, India is the mother of democracy.
Prime Minister Modi wrapped up the speech with a poem that he said he once wrote. Listen to this.
I am reminded of a poem that I once wrote. आसमान में सिर उठाकर, आसमान में सिर उठाकर, घने बादलों को चीरकर, रोशनी का संकल्प ले, अभी तो सूरज उगा है। अभी तो सूरज उगा है। दृढ़ निश्चय के साथ चलकर, दृढ़ निश्चय के साथ चलकर, हर मुश्किल को पार कर, घोर अंधेरे को मिटाते, घोर अंधेरे को मिटाने अभी तो सूरज उगा है।
This speech resonated with Congress members. There were a total of 15 standing ovations, 79 rounds of applause. And when the Prime Minister finished, Congress members rushed to meet him. Some wanted an autograph, others wanted a selfie with him. All in all, a very successful second address at the US Congress, one that attests to India's growing global stature. Now let's tell you about the takeaways from this visit. A lot of agreements have been signed. We'll tell you about the 5 big deals. Number 1 is jet engines. India and America will jointly produce jet engines. And this is very significant. It involves America's General Electric and India's Hindustan Aeronauticals Limited. GE will share the technology. HAL will make the engines. This is critical technology transfer from the United States to India, the first of its kind, and it's being called as consequential as the 2008 nuclear deal. Second on the list is the drone deal. We've been telling you about this for days now. It's official. India will buy 31 drones from the United States, 15 for the Indian Navy and 8 each for the Army and the Air Force. Now there's a Make in India component here too. The drones will be assembled in India. Its maker, General Atomics, will set up a facility in India. Deal number 3 is semiconductors. Again, multiple agreements on this front. There are investments to assemble and test chips in India, also to set up research and training centers. 3 companies will make major investments: Micron Technology, Applied Materials, and Lam Research. Now, deal number 4 is space collaboration. India has joined the Artemis Accords. This is an American initiative, the Artemis Accords. It aims to take humans to the moon by 2025 and to expand space cooperation to Mars and beyond. India has joined this initiative. As part of this, India and the US will undertake a joint mission in 2024. This will be at the International Space Station. Both countries will conduct space activities together. And finally, deal number 5, the decision to settle 6 trade disputes at the WTO, or the World Trade Organization. Now, India and America had multiple outstanding disputes at the WTO. Washington has decided on something like an out-of-court settlement. It is also withdrawing tariffs. Customs duties on 28 items are now gone. Taxes on Indian steel and aluminium, plus duties on American chickpeas, lentils, almonds, walnuts, apples, all of these things have been withdrawn. And all of these were introduced during the Trump era. You would remember, he used to keep complaining about taxes in India. So Trump had launched a mini trade war of sorts with India, and India had hit back with retaliatory tariffs. This war is now ending. And these were the 5 big deals, the major announcements. These were all complicated, long pending issues. But in the spirit of looking beyond differences, both sides have now resolved them. They're focusing on economic ties built on 3 key pillars: technology transfer, co-development, and co-production. They're looking to leverage each other's strength. The US, its technology, and India, its giant workforce.
And with this visit, we're demonstrating once more how India and the United States are collaborating on nearly every human endeavor and delivering progress across the board. From designing new ways to diagnose and treat illnesses like cancer and diabetes, to collaborating on human spaceflight, including sending an Indian astronaut to the International Space Station in 2024, to accelerating the global clean energy transition and tackling the climate crisis.
Among the other agreements, the US Navy will be able to make a stop in Indian shipyards. There is a pact on critical minerals. India has joined the Mineral Security Partnership. It's a US-led effort involving 12 countries. Then there is some relief on the visa front. Indians will not have to travel back home to renew or restamp their visas. They're opening more consulates. India will have a new one in Seattle. And Indian defense liaison officials will now be stationed in American defense commands. A lot of this would have been unthinkable a few decades ago, but now it is being done. And that's my cue to tell you about the Grand State Dinner, a 400-person soiree hosted by the Bidens in honor of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It was certainly a high-stakes dinner, but you see, it was also so much more, because Modi brought a secret weapon to the house, his comedy game. Seriously, he kept the audience in stitches. There were distinguished names and titans of industry. They had a vegetarian bash, because for the first time in recent history, the state dinner was entirely plant-based. It was also an unlikely celebration of fashion, replete with sequins and saris. We'll tell you all about it. Also, go back to the basics. Why is the tradition of state dinner such a big deal? And which ones have been the most memorable ones? Here's a report.
Creamy risotto infused with saffron, crisped millet cakes, portobello mushrooms. Looks delicious, right? But don't worry, we are not here to talk about elevating the mushroom, and our intention isn't to make you hungry. We are only talking about the White House State Dinner, held in honor of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which for the first time in recent history was entirely plant-based. That means no meat, no dairy, and no eggs. All thanks to the guest of honor, who is a strict vegetarian.
As some of you may know, Prime Minister Modi is a vegetarian. So we asked Chef Nina Curtis, a plant-based pioneer, to work with our White House chefs and create a stunning vegetarian menu.
And stunning it was. The food married classic American ingredients with distinctly Indian elements. In a palatable homage to India's rich cuisine, the food prominently featured saffron, a signature flavor of Indian cuisine, whose color is closely associated with the Hindu culture. And notice the nod to millet in the dishes, which makes complete sense. India is the world's leading millet producer, accounting for 20% of the global output. Prime Minister Modi has even promoted millets for global benefit on the world stage. Because here's more than a grain of truth. This wasn't just any meal. The dinner was about high-stakes diplomacy. So the menu was chosen with PM Modi's needs and preferences in mind. After all, the gala dinner was in his honor. And speaking of gala, just look at the guest list. Around 400 guests were invited to the dinner. An eclectic mix of government officials, business leaders, star athletes, and renowned artists. Business tycoons like Mukesh Ambani, who was there along with his wife Neeta, Anand Mahindra, Sundar Pichai, Chief Executive of Alphabet, Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, iconic tennis player Billie Jean King, filmmaker M. Night Shyamalan. In addition to this mix, a clutch of high-profile fashion figures attended, including designer Ralph Lauren and Indian entrepreneur Karishma Swali. Now the Biden administration tends to shy away from conversations about style, but the gala was clearly a friendly overture to the world of fashion, with sequins, saris, and saffron silks. But despite this pomp and pageantry, something else completely stole the show. The camaraderie between Biden and Modi, which was engulfed in heartwarming laughs. See for yourself.
Mr. Prime Minister, I had an Irish grandfather named Ambrose Finnegan, and he used to say that when you give a toast and you don't have any alcohol in your glass, you must do it with your left hand. You think I'm kidding? I'm not.
And we'll tell you what we aren't kidding about. How PM Modi brought his ace comedy game to the dinner. He cracked jokes about the time President Joe Biden wanted him to eat even though he was fasting, and about his lack of singing chops, referring to South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, who surprised guests by getting up on stage during a White House state dinner, honoring him in April, and belted out a rendition of American Pie, one of his favorite songs.
I deliver bad news on the doorstep. I couldn't have one more step. I can't remember if I tried when I read about his willow bride. Something touched me deep inside the day the music died.
This was definitely one of the most memorable state dinner moments. What were the others? State dinner for King George VI in 1939, when a British monarch set foot on American soil for the first time, and 200 years after the US declared its independence from Great Britain.
FDR invited King George VI and his wife Elizabeth to
A state dinner saw dance floor diplomacy.
Go to bed that night.
In 1976, then American President Gerald Ford danced with the late Queen of England. So did Princess Diana with John Travolta in 1985 in a state dinner by President Ronald Reagan. Then in 1987, in his first visit to the US, then Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev arrived in Washington to sign the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And last year, President Biden spent his first state dinner with French President Emmanuel Macron. They had hot dogs and partied until 1 a.m. You see, Washington state dinners are nights of glitzy entertainment. But don't be mistaken. Under that guise, they are a chance to push foreign dignitaries to align with American interests. It looks like song and dance, but it's geopolitics. We'll tell you what we are talking about. The first state dinner was held in 1874 by President Ulysses Grant for King David Kalakaua of Hawaii to strengthen trade. In 1959, President Dwight Eisenhower invited Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, because he wanted to thaw Cold War tensions after the launch of Sputnik. In 2015, President Barack Obama hosted President Xi Jinping of China, before which the two countries negotiated for weeks over an arms control accord for cyberspace. Washington state dinners are aimed at strengthening political partnerships overseas, and Prime Minister Modi knows this well. But he seems to have hit a home run, all while cracking up his audience.
Biden may be basking in the success of Prime Minister Modi's visit. As it wraps up today, he'll have to work on his domestic challenges. And top of the list is economy. The last few months have been all about the economy in the US. You may remember the debt ceiling drama. Only last month, President Biden had to cancel the Quad summit to deal with the debt ceiling issue. So economy is clearly one of his bigger challenges. There have been fears of recession in America. The projections differ, but they all point to one direction. The pain is not going away in a hurry. When Biden met the press after holding talks with Prime Minister Modi, he did not waste the opportunity to highlight what he's doing about it and how engagements with India will help America and American families. For example, the Air India deal with Boeing. It could create 1 million American jobs across 44 states. Biden's message for the middle class and his core voter base was clear. He was trying to work for them. They've suffered the worst of America's economic pressures. For months, there was crippling inflation in the US. Everything was getting more and more expensive. That seems to have cooled off for now. Eggs are cheaper, so is gas. But does that mean the worst is over? The US Fed chair says, no, it's not. That's the head of their central bank. This is what he said.
Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year. Nonetheless, inflation pressures continue to run high, and the process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go.
This has been a long battle for the US Federal Reserve. They have raised interest rates multiple times, 10 hikes in 14 months, and that's a lot. Central banks hike interest rates to cool the economy. How does that work? Well, more interest rates mean higher borrowing costs. So consumer will immediately spend less. And once spending falls, demand falls too. And it leads to a dip in the price of everyday goods, so lower inflation. Now, for the US Fed, the hikes were a desperate attempt, an attempt to get prices back to normal. They may have skipped one rate hike last week, but the war is not over yet. What does that mean? Well, simply put, there could be more rate hikes in America. In the month of May, US inflation rate was 4.1%. That's the lowest it has been since March 2021. But it remains nearly double of 2%. 2% is the rate that the Fed considers healthy, 2% inflation. Right now, it's more than double of that. Now, it has eased a bit, but there's another problem that persists. The crisis within the housing sector. Commercial real estate is struggling in America. Thousands of offices are empty in top cities, the likes of New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Going by one claim, in New York alone, vacant office space could fill more than 26 Empire State buildings. The golden days of buying and flipping houses for money is also over. Investors are losing money on 1 in every 7 homes that they sell. Imagine that, 1 in 7. It's the highest rate since 2016. Also, why are so many offices empty? Because people are not coming back to work. So workplaces are ending their leases and moving to smaller offices. The US economy is losing steam, and it did not happen overnight. A series of events led to this. At the beginning of this year, multiple American banks failed. We've been telling you about this. Then came the layoffs. The tech industry, which is a key economic driver, slashed jobs by the thousands. The US stock market has flatlined, so everyone is nervous. President Biden needs to revive the spirits, and that's why he needs India for the big ticket orders and to shore up his own economic record. And I know it sounds ironic. The world's biggest economy needs a hand from a developing power. But that's what it has come down to. You need steady friends sometimes to get through the hard times. Speaking of economic challenges, let's talk about Turkey too. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is having a change of heart, and Ankara has taken a major U-turn. What are we talking about? Let's start with the latest. Turkey's central bank has raised interest rates from 8.5% to 15%. That's almost double. It's the first rate hike since December 2020. It has caught both the market and experts by surprise.
The size of the rate hike was not expected, although the direction was expected, because after Mehmet Şimşek was appointed, when he mentioned that there is nothing but to return to rationality, there's going to be transparency and consistency, we assumed that turn to rationality implied a turn to orthodox policies. And with a 40% inflation, if you want to implement orthodox policies, what you have to do is tight monetary policy.
Basically, the central bank in Turkey has made borrowing more expensive. We just talked about it. The higher the interest rate, the more expensive borrowing becomes. This is simple economics. The bank says this is a gradual process to begin to bring down inflation and to bring it down to 5%, which is quite an ambitious target. But why is Ankara doing all of this and all of a sudden? I'll give you some context. Turkey's economy is in a mess, and it's been like that for quite a while now, especially under President Erdogan. Inflation, unemployment, weakening currency, it's all breaking records. Look at the numbers. As of May this year, inflation was more than 39%. At its peak last year, it was more than 85%, the highest in 24 years, 85% inflation. Unemployment was more than 10% in April this year, April 2023. And Turkey's currency, the lira, has lost more than 80% of its value against the US dollar in the last 5 years. The economic crisis in the country is severe, to say the least. Next question. How did they end up here? Time for a story. You see, the two E's of Turkey, Erdogan and economy, have had a love-hate relationship. When he became Prime Minister in the year 2002, Erdogan inherited a broken economy. Gradually, he tried to fix it. The result was this. Poverty and unemployment plunged. Inflation that was once in triple digits came down to 5%. And this helped him gain popularity over the years. But then things changed. Erdogan changed. Cut to 2016. He was the president of Turkey then. In 2016 too, a coup attempt to overthrow him was foiled. An emergency was imposed. And it's around this time that things began going south for the economy. Analysts call it a hole of its own making. In fact, economy had become such a big issue even in the elections this year, the one which Erdogan won only narrowly. Voters had little hope that things would change if he came back to power.
Yurt dışındaki yaşayanlar ve ülkemize gelen mülteciler sayesinde şu 2,5 milyonluk bir oyla kazandığı için bilemiyorum. Yani ülkemiz hangi düzeydeyse o düzeyde gidecek, belki daha da ileride daha kötü olacağını düşünüyorum. Çünkü döviz aldı başını gitti, altın gene öylesine. Yani ekonomi çok kötü. Tabii tuzu kuruların şeyi de yok, bir sorunu yok. Fakat asgari ücretli ve emekliler için hayat çok zor olacağını düşünüyorum.
And now he's back in power and he's trying to undo the damage he did to the economy, which brings me to the next question. What did Erdogan do to the economy? Simply put, lack of planning and excessive control on the central bank. You see, the central bank is responsible for monitoring and keeping all key economic metrics under control. When things go south, this bank tries to take measures to contain it. Let's take the current example. To contain inflation, you're hiking interest rates. This is the conventional wisdom. You make borrowing expensive. The circulation of currency falls. So demand and prices of goods goes down. Eventually, inflation goes down. To tackle high inflation, hiking interest rates is a key starting point. But what did Turkey do? The exact opposite. When inflation was rising in the country, they cut interest rates. From 19% in 2021, they lowered rates to 8.5% in March. Why? Because Erdogan. Apparently, he hates the idea of hiking interest rates. He calls himself an enemy of this idea. And rising rates, quote unquote, the mother of all evil. So he tried solving inflation by cutting interest rates. And because Erdogan believed in that, he forced the central bank to play ball, hence the mess. Now he's taking a U-turn to clean up this mess, and he's looking for allies who will help him out. Meet Mehmet Şimşek, an economist and former deputy prime minister of Turkey. He's from Erdogan's party, and he's been handpicked as finance minister to get the economy back on track. His appointment has raised eyebrows because he believes in everything that Erdogan is against. The Perhaps the president realizes how grave the situation is, which is why he's given this man and the central bank a free hand. But Turkey's problems won't go away immediately. It will take time to fix what the president broke. Meanwhile, a fierce diplomatic standoff has broken out between Australia and Russia. A Russian diplomat is squatting just next to the Australian Parliament House. He's occupying land meant for a new Russian embassy in Canberra. The land is just a stone's throw away from the parliament, and on it stands a small box-like structure, which is where the Russian diplomat is living. He refuses to leave, and tensions between Moscow and Canberra are escalating. Australia is pushing for a new law, in fact, to resolve all of this, because the mysterious Russian diplomat's presence has not just sparked off a diplomatic face-off, but also a national security concern. Our next report tells you more.
This is the site where a new Russian embassy was supposed to be built in Australia's capital of Canberra. Today, it wears a deserted look. There's not much activity around here, except for a lone Russian wolf, a Russian diplomat who is squatting on the land and the small building-like structure it houses. He is seen emerging out of the building occasionally for smokes. And while this is just one Russian man, he has sparked a wider diplomatic standoff between Australia and Russia. Apparently, he's protesting Australia's decision to scrap a lease agreement with Moscow, one that allowed the Russians to build a new embassy at the site. Australia had granted the land to Russia on a lease in 2008. Here's how Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has described the man.
The national security threat that was represented by a Russian embassy on site are not the same as some bloke standing on a blade of grass on the site that we don't see really as a threat to our national security.
A bloke. That's how Anthony Albanese described the Russian diplomat. But Prime Minister Albanese might just be underestimating the threat this Russian diplomat poses. You see, the man enjoys diplomatic immunity, which means Australia cannot take action against his squatting. And if it does, that would trigger an unprecedented diplomatic crisis with Russia. Moscow could respond in a number of ways, expelling Australian diplomats or even snapping diplomatic ties with Australia altogether. Because remember, Russia isn't very happy about what's happening in Canberra. Here's what Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said, and I quote, "Unfortunately for us, Australia continues to move zealously in the wake of the authors of the Russophobic hysteria that is now going on in the countries of the collective West. Australia is trying to be a standout amongst these countries. This is yet another unfriendly action by Australia. We will take that into account. If there are any issues that would need cooperation, we will behave accordingly." Russia has also approached Australia's High Court. It is challenging the Australian government's plan to pass laws that would prohibit Moscow from building the embassy. In its appeal, Russia claims it has already spent $5.5 million on construction of the new embassy. But the Australian government seems confident, saying Russia is acting as expected. Russia's primary argument is that Australia is breaking the law. Here's how Australia's Prime Minister reacted to that allegation.
We don't expect that Russia's in a position to talk about international law, given their rejection of it so consistently and so brazenly with their invasion of Ukraine.
But why is Australia so concerned about a Russian embassy? It says the Russian embassy would pose a threat to Australia's national security, considering how close the embassy is to the parliament.
The principal problem with the proposed second Russian embassy in Canberra is its location. This location sits directly adjacent to Parliament House. The government has received clear national security advice that this would be a threat to our national security, and that is why the government is acting decisively today to bring this long-standing matter to a close.
The fear is that Russia will use the embassy to spy on Australian lawmakers. As for the man squatting on the land, Australia's police is hesitant to act. How the legal battle between Australia and Russia plays out remains to be seen. But Australia's decision to scrap the embassy lease and the emergence of a Russian squatter have certainly raised tempers in both Moscow as well as Canberra.
Let's start our next story with a question or a few questions. Have you ever taken an exam that you were not prepared for? one for which you did not study enough, and just before that exam begins, you send a desperate plea to the heavens above, hoping for some divine intervention, praying that the gods bail you out just this once. If you identify with this, then you will understand the plight of the Chinese. Why? Because there's been a sudden spike in religiosity among them, especially the youth. Young people in China are flocking to temples. Is this for faith? The Chinese are facing a slew of troubles, the biggest being economic slowdown, the after effects of the pandemic and rising unemployment. So naturally, young Chinese adults are anxious. They have degrees with them, but no jobs. The youth unemployment rate rose to more than 18% in the first 2 months of this year, and despite the Xi government trying to put a spin on it, the existential anxiety among the young is only growing. What's unique about this situation, though? After all, no one seeks out God more than the trouble. The deeper the crisis, the more fervent your prayers. Most of us have been there. But China is a unique case because the Chinese Communist Party, which rules this country, is officially atheist. So God is persona non grata for them. The state does recognize 5 religions though: Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, Catholicism and Protestantism. But China is among the world's least religious countries. It has the most number of non-believers, almost close to 1 billion. For the Chinese to be turning to God in their moment of crisis is not a routine matter. What has changed, you may ask? After China reopened and dropped its stringent COVID lockdown rules, Buddhist and Taoist temples have become a popular destination for the young. And temples anywhere in the world are usually not youth hotspots. But disillusioned Chinese are hot-footing it to these places of worship in search of solace. Temple hopping in China is now a trendy activity. The Lama Temple, or Yongyi Palace in Beijing, is a Tibetan Buddhist temple. It is now among the most visited in the country. The Lama Temple sees a footfall of around 40,000 visitors every day. This has been happening since early March, and it's not an isolated case. Compared to last year, visits to temples across China have surged by more than 300% in 2023. What's more, millennials and Gen Z make up half of these numbers. Remember, most of them would have had an atheist or Marxist education. So it's going against the grain. Meanwhile, temples are now wooing the young. Some have opened one-of-a-kind coffee shops inside their premises. Others offer immersive experiences with the help of metaverse and AI technologies. It's not like the youth are looking to become monks or nuns, though. What they're looking for is an antidote to the pressures of life, and religion seems to be providing them a safe haven. For the unemployed young Chinese adults, life seems to be stuck in buffering. With the Xi government and its policies letting them down, they're now looking for some cosmic support to intercede on their behalf, or at the very least, lend a patient ear. So is China retrospectively legitimizing God? From the Chinese Communist Party's public disavowal of God to the youth's newfound theological love, it is quite a leap of faith. In March, the Beijing News published an op-ed. It urged the youth to work harder at their jobs rather than praying to deities. The state media have also criticized so-called Buddhist socialities for allegedly flaunting their wealth at temples. But this has not stopped the religious awakening of China's millennials and Gen Z. This sudden love for everything God-adjacent is not simply a matter of experience, though. It seems more like a shield for the youth in the battlefield of modern life. So the temple run is likely to continue in jobless China. Now let's talk about Titan, the submarine that dove into the Titan wreck site on Sunday and went missing. I told you about this week, and now there's an update, an unfortunate one, I'm afraid. The submarine imploded in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean with all 5 people on board. What's worse, reports say the US knew within 24 hours of disappearance that the submarine had imploded. And there's a chorus of experts claiming that this was an accident waiting to happen. Here's more.
This is the Titan submarine. It embarked on a 4,000-meter dive to the Titanic shipwreck on Sunday last week, with 5 crew members on board, including a British billionaire and a French adventurer. But within 2 hours of this dive, the submarine vanished. It had gone missing, all communication suddenly stopped, and no further sign of life was detected. This led to a days-long search and rescue operation until today's grim discovery. The submarine faced a catastrophic implosion, and all 5 crew members have died.
This morning, an ROV, or remote operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor. The ROV subsequently found additional debris. In consultation with experts from within the Unified Command, the debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber.
Family members were informed there had been no survivors, but the bodies of the deceased crew members may never be found. And as the world continues to grieve and tributes pour in, OceanGate is under fire. Titan Submarine is owned by OceanGate, a private company that offers an expedition to the wreck of the Titanic for $250,000 a seat. And this is what the co-founder had to say.
Well, I can't speculate on what's going on currently right now. What I do know is, regardless of the sub, when you're operating at depths like 3,800 meters down, the pressure is so great on any sub that if there is a failure, it would be an instantaneous implosion. And so that, if that's what happened, that's what would have happened 4 days ago.
Now, investigation is still underway, but one person says that the US already knew that the sub had imploded. We are talking about Hollywood filmmaker James Cameron, the director of the 1997 Oscar-winning film Titanic. He claims to have received the information within 24 hours of the disappearance, saying that the submersible had imploded when it lost communication with its mothership. Listen in.
We got confirmation within an hour that there had been a loud bang at the same time that the sub was, that comms were lost. A loud bang on the hydrophones, loss of transducer or transponder, loss of comms. I knew what happened. Sub imploded. I sent emails to everybody I know. I said, we've lost some friends. The sub has imploded. It's on the bottom in pieces right now. I sent that out Monday morning.
His statement comes after reports claim something similar, that secret US Navy underwater microphones detected the Titan sub's implosion several days ago. But more than questions about rescue secrecy, there are questions about safety. There is a long list of concerns about the company's safety record. There is a lawsuit, a letter from industry leaders, and comments from the company's own CEO, one of the missing crewmen. All of these point to potential issues with the Titan submersible. So while the investigation brings conclusive results and issues are overcome, scientists have urged to halt Titanic trips.
We need to put a stop to all trips to the Titanic. This is what we did when the shuttle Challenger exploded. We shut down the entire U.S. space program. We need to do at least that now. Whether we find the vessel and determine what went wrong with this vessel.
The question is, after the Titan tragedy, will explorers continue to embark upon their misguided adventures, sealed in the OceanGate submarines?
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Ahead of Hajj, pilgrims performed Friday prayers at Mecca's Grand Mosque in Saudi Arabia. A massive hailstorm in Colorado injured concert goers in an amphitheater. The apple-sized hail was caught on camera. Orcas were filmed nudging the rudder of a yacht as it competed in a race near Gibraltar. And finally, what makes the 23rd of June significant? We're taking you back in history to 1757, when the Battle of Plassey was fought. It is remembered as a historic battle and a turning point in the history of India when the British East India Company defeated the Nawab of Bengal, marking the start of nearly 2 centuries of British rule in India. We're leaving you with these. Thanks for watching. See you.
Cool. ربنا ولك الحمد. الله أكبر. الله